When something bad happens, they don't take that personally. Learning to be more optimistic, it's more than just shifting the way that you think. Hi, this is Jim Breon. Welcome to this YouTube channel where we discuss all things mental health. Today what I'm going to be talking about is something called learned optimism. I don't know if you've been able to determine for yourself if you tend to be an optimist or more of a pessimist. There are kind of two ways of looking at the world. An optimist is, what we think of as somebody who sees the glass half full. A pessimist is someone who sees the glass half empty, so to speak. There actually are some real benefits to being an optimistic person. People who are more optimistic tend to have better health, better mental health. They tend to be more motivated. Some studies show that they live longer and that they're more resilient. In other words, able to bounce back from difficulties in life. If you find that you're a pessimist, sort of by nature, don't think that that's the way you constantly have to be, though, because there's actually some research that shows that people can learn to shift their style of explaining things in the world from a more pessimistic view to an optimistic view. There's a researcher named Martin Seligman, very famous psychologist, who did research on something called learned helplessness many years ago. This is something that happens when someone tries time and time again to achieve something, to make something happen, and that just seems like they can never make it happen, and eventually just start giving up. And learned helplessness is a real problem for some people because they lack motivation completely. They've just become so disheartened that they just don't try any longer. But he's also done research on what he calls learned optimism. And the way that he explains the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is by their explanatory style. In other words, the way that we explain things that happen in our lives. Now, there are some elements of, being an optimist or a pessimist that have to do with heredity and early experiences, especially things like growing up where your family is financially secure or insecure, depending on whether your parents are very warm or whether they're not so warm. But a lot of it is also a learned explanatory style. So learning to be more optimistic, if that's what somebody chooses to do, this is not turning into like toxic positivity where we just think everything is unicorns and rainbows. That's something very different. But it is possible to start changing your point of view by challenging some negative self-talk and learning ways to increase your optimism. When we think of explanatory styles, there are three elements that determine a person's explanatory style. Whether they see problems as permanent, pervasive, and personal. What that means is a pessimist is somebody that when something bad happens, they see that as something it's always going to be this way. If this part doesn't work, then all the other parts aren't going to work. And they make it personal. In other words, they think about this didn't work out because of some personal failing of mine. Whereas an optimist has a very different explanatory style. When something bad happens, they don't take that personally. And rather than saying, oh my God, I'm a failure, they'll tell themselves, well, it didn't work this time, but I'm going to keep trying. And they don't tell themselves that it's always going to be this way and that it's going to be this way in every situation. It's much more like positive self-talk as opposed to negative self-talk. It didn't work this time, but that was a really hard project and I wasn't really prepared. So I'm going to learn more about it and I'm going to be more prepared. And I remember that all those other times that I've done stuff that worked out, so I can do that too. So that's what we think of as the difference between an optimistic or pessimistic explanatory style. So again, whether we are an optimist or a pessimist based on our worldview, part of it has to do with heredity, temperament, that sort of thing, but much of it is learned. And the research tells us that there's actually an optimal time for a young person, a child, to learn to be more optimistic if they tend to be a pessimist. I know I've worked with a lot of teens over the years, and when I ask them, how do you view the world? Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Almost all of them will raise their hand and say that they're a pessimist. Now, these are teens that are, struggling with mental health challenges, but it's really kind of impressive to me to see how many young people really have a pessimistic worldview. And there really seems to be an optimal time to help young people develop optimism. It's when they're old enough to mentalize, in other words, understand that everybody has moods that affect their thoughts and their behaviors, and that they change all the time, and that they can have different mood states and mental states. It's when they're developing their cognitive abilities. And really, right in the years just before they hit puberty is actually an optimal time to start teaching a young person how to be more optimistic. Much of that is based in cognitive behavioral therapy ideas, challenging negative self-talk, challenging our cognitive distortions. And again, this doesn't mean teaching them to be, just toxic positivity. And it does take time. And we can also go to the extreme. An overly optimistic person tends to be unrealistic and tending towards narcissism. And when you start bringing in that trait of narcissism, you can see that this is a person who's highly optimistic about their abilities because they're grandiose and superior. So that's not what we're teaching either. That type of person will take unhealthy risks, they underestimate danger. But learning to be more optimistic, it's more than just shifting the way that you think. It's actually learning to find greater purpose in life and moving towards what we think of as authentic happiness. The Greeks had two terms for describing happiness. One of those terms is hedonia, the other is eudaimonia. Hedonia is sort of the root word of words like hedonism, hedonistic. It's the pleasure principle. That's one way to seek happiness. I'll be happy when I get that fancy car. I'll be happy when I get that big house or that boat or that, beautiful partner. But it seems that that sort of happiness doesn't really last very long, because now I need a bigger house, I need a bigger boat. That's what sets us on a hedonic treadmill. There's a different way of seeking happiness in our lives, and the Greeks would call this eudaimonic happiness, meaning that I find happiness based in healthy relationships that I have with people, meaningful work, finding purpose, really understanding true joy, living according to my values, and knowing who I am, rather than basing happiness on how much stuff I have. So cognitive behavioral approaches can be very helpful in assisting somebody in becoming more optimistic, and also learning to be grateful for the things that you do have. Gratitude is actually a great way to start to shift your outlook. Finding things that you have to be grateful for, even if they're small things. Like, I had a great conversation with a friend today, or I'm grateful that, I have a roof over my head. It can be some of the most basic things, but you can actually start to shift your perspective simply by practicing gratitude. You can also do this by helping other people that are in greater need than yourself, stepping outside of oneself to find a purpose and meaning in helping others. And then continuing to challenge all of our negative self-talk. Think about whether you might want to actually start to shift your explanatory style to become more optimistic. Like I say, there's lots of benefits to being a more optimistic person as far as resilience, emotional health, physical health. So I hope the videos are helpful, and if so, I encourage you to like and subscribe, sign up for notifications so we can let you know when there's more material coming out. And feel free to leave comments and start a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Bye-bye.